I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and happy Hanukkah! Tonight is the 8th night of Hanukkah. I can't believe that we are here already. Every night of Hanukkah this year, I have shared a new yarn dyeing video as part of the 2022 ChemKnits Hanukkah special. And, well, we're not done after tonight. There are 3 bonus videos, 2 yarn dyeing and 1 behind the scenes vlog that will take place on the next 3 nights. So we don't have to stop celebrating, even though tonight might be the last night that we're lighting candles. Tonight, I want to bring things full circle by doing another cold process layering technique. Very similar in some respects to what we did on night 1. However, in night 1, we did multiple layers of color trying to cover all of the yarn each time. And tonight, we're going to be doing multiple different colors, but layered in a smaller environment to try to get still soft, but a more variegated feel on purpose. That's right, I am bringing out the shoe boxes so we can layer colors on and then mix it all up to get that soft, variegated feel. Dyeing yarn this way will give us a little bit more control than what we might have if we're doing layered tonal, where we don't have as much say over which ones pick up more pigment and which pick up less pigment. Tonight's project is very much dyeing by feel. I'm going to try to keep things consistent batch to batch, but I'm not really measuring or thinking about the total amount of dye that I'm using. In preparation for this project, I went ahead and measured out 5 grams of 3 different brown colors that I know are distinct from one another from various swatching that I've done in the past. The 3 browns that I picked are Espresso Bean, which is very purple leaning, Chocolate Brown, which is a little bit more almost red leaning brown, and then Teddy Bear Brown, which is a very brown. I dissolved the 5 grams of dye that I measured out in a non-specific volume of water. So I would say that we have anywhere between maybe a 1.5 to a 2.5% stock solution. But that's not necessarily the important thing for tonight. But that is some off-camera prep work that I did to get started. But now, please make sure that you are subscribed and you have your notifications turned on. And let's go start dyeing the yarn. Today we are gonna dye 135 grams of yarn in 7 plastic shoe boxes. Each of these shoe boxes has 8 cups of just plain, cool tap water, no acid yet. I am going to add 200 grams of yarn to most of these boxes, but one of them will only have about 150 grams because that's the way these mini skeins that I have will divide up. Today we are going to be dyeing Wool to Dye-Force Platinum Stock and Platinum DK. This 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon yarn has been pre-wound into 10-gram mini skeins, or micro skeins as you would find them on Wool to Dye-Force website. My goal is to dye each of the boxes as similarly as I can. However, since we're dyeing 10-gram mini skeins instead of 100 grams of yarn, any asymmetry that we have across the width of these boxes will mean that there will be some differences in the mini skeins. So one thing I am curious about is when I go and twist these up in the end, do I see any kind of like fade or a difference in there or not? And this isn't exactly an indication whether a full skein would be asymmetric because of the way mini skeins move within the zip tie, but you know, it's something that I'm curious about. I laid the mini skeins in the pot, trying not to twist minis, although some minis may be twisted, and just kind of scrunched them up so that way they would fit well. We definitely have a better chance at achieving some consistency within each shoebox dye pot since we have them all laid out here together. If I was going to use the same shoebox one at a time, doing this type of cold process dyeing, well, then there might be more variation because I might lay the yarn out slightly differently. I might pour the dyes on slightly differently. And so having this all sort of set up on the counter at once will give us the best chance at achieving a similar result. There is no acid in here yet. And sometimes when I do this pouring, I like to add things just on half or asymmetric in here. I'm gonna go by feel, and I'm not gonna worry about all the mini skeins being identical. But we're gonna start with some cabernet, and this is a very pigmented color. One that I expect will eventually spread out a ton. Now, I have not added any acid in here yet. I plan to do so a little bit before we wait to move the yarn. But I'm glad the squeeze bottle worked. Sometimes they don't work right away. Just a hint of some cabernet. Okay, now I want to add some red. I'm debating if I should just be going for lines across. I mean, I guess so. Maybe later on the shapes will be different, but let's just do it. And how many did I do? 4, 5. Trying to treat everything approximately the same. It's okay if some of them have more dye than others. We also, and see there was a dribble, there is a randomness to this, but I'm curious how similar things will be across the different containers. Now the thing with doing things like this, whoop, that might be a little more, but that's okay. The thing about setting things up like this and doing these lines is that there's not a lot of force when I'm pouring it in, as there would be if I'm doing a larger volume. But I can see, and I'll try to move the camera maybe before colors, that like the cabernet is wicking down along the edge and things like that. So the colors are gonna move, especially because we don't have the acid in here yet. I will be adding the acid, I think, right before I'm gonna move things around. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. Now my tap water is slightly acidic, so that is worth keeping in mind. This is just a little bit of some deep magenta, which is not spraying as well as the other colors right now. And so we might need to figure out a way to block or open up the clog. So I'm going to need to open up the clog. And then I can carry on. Now one of these containers, which I think is this one right here by my hand, has only 15 grams of yarn. All of the yarn is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. These are 10 gram mini skeins in both fingering weight and DK weight yarn. And I'm treating everything the same, whether we have a little bit more or a little bit less. But, ooh, yes, the colors are spreading through. There's enough water in here that things are floating a little bit, and so that is good. And just to give a little bit of a sense of what's happening down beneath, not over here, I didn't go to the edge as much, so I'm not seeing fingers there, but along the cabernet edge, you can see all that dye spreading down. And things will spread over time, but also once we go and move the yarn, things will also spread a fair amount. I'm starting with what I think is the espresso bean, and therefore it is the purplest of the browns, adding, goodness, I guess about 35 milliliters, so a fair amount. And you can see from the force of this, whoop, the dye is spreading a lot, and that is okay. Now whether or not it's going to make the other colors move, whether we're going to lose some of those pinks entirely, that I don't know. I will clean up that little spill in a moment. Whoop. And so we may or may not see any of that pink left, or we may decide that we want to add a little bit more shortly, but that is our espresso bean. Okay, next I'm coming in with the chocolate brown, which is also a pretty reddish brown. I'm doing about 15 milliliters measured by my turkey baster. and just putting it into this middle area here. I think that the turkey baster is actually fairly gentle in terms of delivery, and so it's not going to push the dye down very much, but it is going to sort of spread across. Now this one is definitely mixed at a greater than a 1% stock solution because I had 5 grams of dye in this cup. And so that could be closer than a 2% stock. Finally, we have our teddy bear brown. And I think I'm gonna go for about 20 milliliters and just add this down here. We will see variation in here based on like where the dye can access and when, and so I'm not sure how much of the other colors we will see, but the thing is, even once we move it, if I look at it and I'm like, gee, I wish there was more pink, we can add more pink and then move things again. So we are not limited to where the colorway is with this technique to once we move it. If you ever get to a point when you're trying something out and you're like, man, I wish there was just a little bit more something, add that more something. There's no reason why you would need to just stop and give up. But anyway, I am now gonna wait 10 minutes before we add acid and move the yarn in these containers to kind of spread everything out and see what kind of colorways we've created. It has been 10 minutes, which has let these colors spread out a bit, but you know, on top we still see some white, and along the sides maybe there's a little bit of white too. But now I'm going to start adding some acid. So I'm going to add 1 tablespoon over the pink stripe, and then I haven't decided where I'm going to add the second yet, but that'll give us a total of 2 tablespoons, maybe down here, 2 tablespoons of white vinegar with 8 cups of water. This is a proportion I use frequently, and I'm going to need more acid. I don't think I've added any to those 2 yet. 1, 2. All right. And now I am going to lift. Ooh, the back is pretty. Lift and lower the yarn in, and I'm lifting it again. Ooh, that's pretty. Because I just wanted to see sort of how much of the pink and red sort of stayed. I don't know how much like variation we'll see because we use like 3 different browns in here, but I'm glad that like some hint of the pink and red is staying in here. I'm very, very glad about that. And so I'm just moving and pressing, and we're going to continue on and do that to the rest. This container is interesting because it has like DK and fingering weight in there. So it doesn't look like the red and pink went all the way through to the other side. So it's possible we will have some mini skeins that have just one of those colors and not the other, or similar. But I'm not worried or anything. I would be curious. I did an experiment recently to when I filmed this, not recently to when this is being published, where I removed the yarn and steam set it immediately, or I did not move the yarn in the box at all. And I could have done that here, but I really, really like the effects of moving it. I like the softness that gives. I like the way the colors spread, but I would be curious to see how much, like with a bare skein of yarn, how much of the color has struck to our yarn already and how much hasn't. Now, where do we go from here? I could, in theory, take this yarn and put it in like a kettle and we could just steam set it immediately. But that's not, or not steam set, immersion set it immediately, but that's not what we're gonna do. Instead, I am going to set these aside for, I would say overnight, but maybe 2 days, we'll see. And then we are going to steam set it all together. And this is a thing that is really wonderful to do because right here I have, 135 grams of yarn that we're dyeing all at the same time. And I'm dyeing all the yarn at the same time, which would have been really hard for me to do with just dye pots on my stove, just because I'm limited in terms of the space that I have. And so doing an initial cool process, I mean, I'll set them outside. Today is a cool day, but it'll probably be 90 degrees again tomorrow. Doing a cold process like this allows the colors to absorb a little bit slower, but it also just means that I can do one big steam setting step, which frees up the pot and the stove a lot sooner and allows me to process more yarn at once, which is a big thing for a small batch dyer, and which is why this is a horn that I like to toot, because it really does make a difference as I'm dyeing. But anyway, ooh, I think I'm gonna go ahead and add just a 1/3 tablespoon of white vinegar in everywhere, because it's not gonna hurt. I'm not planning on moving the yarn again, but it will move a little bit as I move it outside. But now I'm going to place the covers on these. When we go ahead and steam set, I don't think I'm gonna be doing anything to keep like the pairs together in any kind of way. I'm not gonna try to keep track of that. But the sets that were grouped together in a set of 10 or 5, those are held together. And so those I will be able to easily compare once the yarn is dry, because they'll be buddies throughout the whole process. But I guess one thing I am curious about is if this is going to look more brown or more purple, because this was mostly brown, but I would say also mostly like a purple brown and a reddish brown. So I'm curious about that. But anyway, I'll see you all in a couple of days. Now it's time to leave no dye behind. And we do technically have 3 different browns here with a reasonable amount of dye left. So I decided to start off cold with 300 grams of yarn. These are 20-gram mini skeins in both DK and fingering weight platinum. And I covered it with just barely enough water to cover the yarn, and then started bringing over the dyes, keeping each one sort of in its own section, working it through with my fingertips until we got pretty good coverage on the yarn. Then I added some acid, just some big splashes of vinegar, took the yarn over to the stove to heat set the yarn for at least 30 minutes, and then I let the yarn cool completely and washed it off camera. After I had set that up, we still had some dye left over. So I took some other twisted mini skeins of platinum, briefly soaked them in some water with vinegar, and used them to start wiping out the container, excess dye, really like soaking that up, and then I steam set them for 30 minutes. It's been about a day and a half, and I have to say, for planning something that was going to be a brown with some pops of maybe red and pink, we have a very, very lovely dusty purple and pink colorway. I think a combination of the very purple espresso bean with a lot of cabernet red and pink, and I think that chocolate brown is a little bit reddish. That brought everything into this very like purpley dusty rose category, which honestly I'm not that mad about. It's very, very pretty. Just different from what I had originally planned, and so I may need to bring some more brown into some of the other colorways I'm planning for Chanukah. But anyway, I would say just about all of the colors in the yarn. There's maybe like a hint of a tint in there. Ooh, this is so pretty. But anyway, I'm gonna go and steam set this. I'm curious to see if when it's dry, it's going to feel more brown. It's possible some of the containers may end up feeling more brown, but I have a feeling they'll all feel fairly similar. So I'm gonna steam set everything for the pot starting cool, so we'll probably steam set for about 45 minutes, and then I'll let the yarn cool completely so we can wash it. But just to show, let's pick another pot. Yeah, this one is also looking very, very purple. That Cabernet a little goes a long way. I mean, there's a tiny bit of a brownish hint in there. I think this is still super pretty. Again, just, I mean, these colorways are always subtle, but I was expecting more of an overall brown flare. But that's okay. Let's wash this yarn.
I can't wait to see this next to the yarn mops, which are looking a lot more brown to me. But our good news is that there's no color in here. At least not yet, and hopefully not yet. I used to do solar drying and not heat set after. I used a steamer basket inside a kettle, actually a pasta insert inside a kettle, to steam set the yarn for 30 minutes. And the reason why I like to do that is just because there are some pigments that just need more time. And so I'd rather be extra safe and do that. Now, the plus side is that, again, I did I think it was 45 minutes, including the time to heat the steamer basket up, steam on this yarn, versus doing multiple 30-minute kettle dyeing for each of these colorways. And so that, I think, is a win. Of course, it is also a win that there's no bleeding. So I'm gonna go ahead and wash the rest of the yarn, put it all through my spin dryer, and then hang it up to dry. Here is the dry yarn. You can feel pops of our pink and our red, just a little bit here and there. There are also pops of all these other colors, and the blending gave us overall this pinky purple kind of colorway. What I don't see here is a ton of brown. There are some hints and accents that I feel a bit more now that it's dry. But again, it's the pink and the purple that are really coming through for me a lot more. The color sections in here are very smooth, but also fairly short. And I'm curious about how, like, the 10 mini skeins that are in one bundle, how those kind of group together and work together, what variation we might see through them. So as I'm twisting them up, I'm going to try to keep bundles of it together so that way we can do a small comparison. But from this first glance over here, things do feel really, really similar. The brown tones are coming through so much more on our Leave No Dye Behind yarn. You can feel the redder brown, the more cool toned gray brown, and then our purpley brown is very, very pigmented down here. We did end up with a bit of a light patch on here from where some of the color didn't spread, but I don't think I mind that. I'm really excited to see these twisted up. And then we also have our little more moppity mops, which are a lot more pastel than the rest of the colorways, whether we're dealing with our shoebox yarn or our Leave No Dye Behind yarn. But it's still fun, and you can see all the different sort of shorter sections of color because we dyed this while the skeins were twisted. Here are just a couple of the Leave No Dye Behind skeins twisted up. And where you decide to start twisting really makes a difference on how the skeins appear. Like in this one way, you see that purple a lot more, and it is a lot more subtle and hidden when it's more blended in with the other browns. And so, yeah, it's just something that is a little fun to think about when you are twisting your yarn. But I personally really like this presentation of these two the most. But I mean, even these other skeins are super cute as well. So sometimes it's worth just thinking about and potentially reskeining when you want to show off your colorway in the best way that you think you can. So I'm probably going to reskein those two. I always worry that Leave No Dye Behind colorways may be too similar to the colorway that I was dyeing in the video, but today there are definite differences. You can see them untwisted and then even twisted. These color sections are smooth, just like they are over here. They're pretty smooth here, but the color sections in here are smaller. We've got some little pops of some bright color, and I'm actually seeing the brown in here a little bit more, even though this overall still feels very, very pink and purple. Now that the minis have been twisted and I've removed the much more brown Leave No Dye Behind skeins, I feel a lot more brown in here than I did when they were untwisted. Now, if I am looking at within one section, some of them I have a little bit more of a pop of red or pop of pink than others, but overall, these are very, very consistent. But I'm now going to bring in a few more groups. I don't remember if I mixed fingering and DK in any of the shoe boxes. Here we have 2 fingering sets, here are 2 DK, and I tried to pull them from random places thinking that that's most likely to not be in the same shoebox. But while I think that there are some minor differences between dye lots here, overall things are remarkably similar. And so I think I'm going to need to try this again sometime, but sort of keeping track of the overall placement and sort of keeping notes, maybe using colored pencils to draw a map on where I'm pouring the colors and how I'm doing that before moving the yarn, and then trying to do it in multiple stages versus everything all at once. Because doing it all at once means I'm much more likely to have similar results, like what we're seeing here. Looking at a lot of the yarn all together, I do see some saturation differences in a few areas, but ultimately there's a lot of consistency here, and I'm thrilled about that. This shoebox technique is quickly becoming one of my favorites. I love just pouring in the dye and blending things together to see what we end up with. And the softness that you get from it is a lot of fun. Now, you can definitely do this with colors that have more contrast. And, well, the colors that we used did have some contrast to them. But part of this whole process is blending them together a little bit, and that gives the soft colorway in the end.
While editing this video, I realized I never said the name of the red on camera. And that seems odd. I also am not entirely sure why I decided to mix up all of the dyes off camera. And because I made a note to myself to talk about it in the introduction before I started filming. And maybe it's because in the first 2 videos of the Chanukah special, there was a lot of like math talk, and I showed a lot of mixing and measuring out dyes. So maybe I just wanted to do something different for this one, but oh, I might have it in my diary. The DYEARIE. Let me go check. Aha! I can find that I filmed this on August 10th, 2022, and the red was Cherry Bomb. So I did have that written down somewhere, which is the reason I can advocate for having something where you can write things down versus just relying on video footage to keep track of your recipes and measurements. I'm very guilty of doing the latter, but for something like Chanukah, when I know I'm going to be dyeing multiple rounds, I'm much better about taking notes and keeping track of what it is I'm doing. But yeah, I can see I also kept good track of how many Leave No Dye Behind minis I had used for each night and things like that. So, all right, I had some more organization than I thought. But anyway, this yarn turned out to be really, really beautiful. If I had wanted to maintain more variation on here, I could have added acid and waited a little bit before moving the yarn. But I know that sometimes when you have acid in there, the colors might start to strike pretty quickly, and so then you don't get the softness that we were able to get here. And had I used more of a range of colors, had I brought in some blue or some yellow, we would see even more sort of shifts in here. But I was intentionally using palettes that were very similar, even though we had a range in the 3 browns that I picked, but we also had a range in the 3 red and pink shades that I put in there as well. It's just blended together. We get this sort of beautiful brown purple yarn. Clearly, I filmed this early on. I think that this was the 3rd video I mentioned. And I talked about giving brown its own moment in the series. And that never really happened. So although I have some Dye Pot weeklies that are featuring different browns that have come out during this week or otherwise in December, I still think that brown deserves its own moment to be a star. And so that is something that I hope to film as we head into 2023. Now, one other thing I really wanted to talk about here is what is the difference between like solar dyeing, cool vat dyeing, cold process dyeing? Well, a lot of them really sometimes I might use a little interchangeably. I think I refer to like cool vat or cold process more than solar dyeing these days, even if I'm putting the yarn outside and so therefore I'm getting heat of the sun. No matter what, I like to steam set the yarn after I am done. But what this kind of processing, color processing does is allows you to use a heat that isn't from a microwave or a stove to allow the colors to start to strike to your yarn. And so if it's solar dyeing, then you're usually outside taking advantage of the heat of a summer day or the heat from a sun, sort of on a trapped container. And so I hope that that helps a little bit. But I love using these shoe boxes because they stack well. It would be really easy for me to set this up with 7 different colors of tonals. They're a little bit more cramped, which is good for techniques like this. If I want more liquid, then I'll go ahead and use those 5-gallon buckets that I'm also a huge fan of. I do wish that there were, and I'm sure they may exist, but I wish that there were clear ones because it would be cool to be able to like look inside without opening it up and moving the yarn to get a sense of what's happening. But I guess I'll just have to be patient and wait. Tonight is the 8th night of Chanukah, but as I said at the beginning of the video, the 2022 ChemKnits Chanukah special is not over. We have 2 more yarn dyeing videos that will come out at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the next 2 nights, where I'll be dyeing full skeins of yarn that were bonus add-ons for the Chanukah yarn sampler. And then the 3rd bonus video will be a behind the scenes vlog where I'll take you through the actual sampler, the extras that I made, some of my thought process along the way. Basically, every time I wish I could have shared something, but couldn't because it might be a spoiler, I filmed a vlog clip. So I haven't edited it yet, so I don't know how long it is, but that's coming soon. And so if you want to make sure you don't miss any of this, please subscribe and turn on notifications. This is by far the biggest way that you can help support the content here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. The more you engage with the videos, the more likely YouTube is to recommend it to new viewers. Of course, there are many other ways that you can support the content here. I have tons of links in the video description where you can find me on social media and other ways that you can help support ChemKnits. But one of the biggest ways you can help support content is actually by going and checking out my Etsy shop, ChemKnits Creations. The shop is filled with hand-dyed yarn that has been featured in my videos. There's probably not anything left from the 2022 Chanukah special, but there's a lot of other yarn that's been featured in my videos. And so it's a great way to support the content, plus you get some fun hand-dyed yarn, and you can watch or rewatch exactly how I dyed it, which I think makes it extra unique and special. You can find a link to my Etsy shop, along with all these other links that I've mentioned, down in the video description. I would like to wish all of you a very, very happy Chanukah. And because tonight happens to be December 25th, a Merry Christmas to everyone who is celebrating. And as we head into our first bonus video, I guess technically night 9 of the ChemKnits Chanukah special, I know that there are many of you with samplers who will get to open a bonus skein tomorrow night. But tomorrow we will be dyeing a merino yak silk blend that is one of the softest yarn bases I have ever felt in my life. It is such a joy to knit with, and I adore the colorway, so I cannot wait for you to see it. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits. Happy Chanukah, and I'll see you tomorrow night.